All right, good morning and thanks for tuning in. I'm Ann Gill, the President and CEO of the Tempe Chamber of Commerce. And on behalf of the Board of Directors and our Chamber team, welcome to our June 2021 Emerging Issues Forum presented by SRP. The Tempe Chamber is an innovative chamber that's recognized as an organization focused on programs and policies that create jobs and help grow the economy. Throughout the pandemic, the Tempe Chamber has been advocating for COVID-19 liability protection for our businesses. Senate Bill 1377, which protects businesses and organizations from undue litigation because of the pandemic, is a good one for business. And upon being signed into law by the governor, businesses that have been following health and safety measures since March of 2020 are protected against frivolous civil lawsuits. However, this new law does not mean your business can become complacent, which brings us to our program for you today, where you will learn how to remain in compliance with the new law, how the law protects your business from frivolous lawsuits, best practices and safety mitigation, and tips on how to handle future guidance changes. I look forward to the program today and hearing from our panelists from Working Aware and Davis Miles McGuire Gardner. And so today, to ask questions during the broadcast, please type them directly into the chat sidebar in the Q&A, as your video and microphone will not be enabled as a guest, but you can use the Q&A to submit your questions, and we'll be monitoring those as we get to the Q&A portion at the end of the program. So the Tempe Chamber is able to continue to provide our members valuable content like today's programming, thanks to the generosity and support of our emerging issues sponsor, SRP. SRP has delivered on its commitment to provide reliable and affordable water and power to Central Arizona for more than a century. And by providing these essential resources, SRP has helped Tempe as well as the Phoenix metro area to develop and thrive. SRP has been an active and supportive of the Tempe Chamber for 50 years, and we are truly grateful for the partnership. Joining us today from SRP is Alan Ader, Senior Government Relations Representative for SRP. So please give a warm virtual welcome to Alan.
Thanks for the introduction, Anne. I appreciate it. Good morning, everyone. I just want to provide a few remarks on behalf of SRP as you're settling in and express our appreciation to the Tempe Chamber and our guests today. We want to extend our thanks for today's event and especially for the timely topic, safety and compliance. I know it's early in the morning, but it's never too early to talk about safety and compliance from our perspective. Delivering water and power in the Valley for over 100 years, safety and reliability are core elements of our culture and support for our employees, customers, and our communities. As summer is now upon us and the monsoon season hopefully will be starting soon, SRP is renewing its efforts to help empower and communities with the tools and information they need to stay safe. In addition to water and wildfire safety, we encourage businesses and individuals to secure balloons, signage, and patio furniture as winds pick up. I know it sounds a little tedious, but unsecured items aren't only unsafe for people and property, but they can cause power disruptions. This past year has been a difficult one for many reasons. We know our customers face significant challenges that no one could have anticipated. In addition to the global pandemic, Arizona faced record-setting conditions in the number of days of extreme heat and conditions from fires here and in California. We continue to work to ensure that we're able to provide affordable and reliable service, even in the face of these challenges. All the while, we're still growing our sustainable resource portfolio. You might have recently heard we've had a recent announcement that will double our solar resources by 2025. We committed to our customers last summer that we're here to help, and that commitment has not changed. If you know someone who's struggling with past due balances on SRP statements, please reach out to us. We have dedicated customer service reps who can help get you or your neighbors, your friends connected to the resources for assistance. So with all that said, just want to thank you for including us. We're glad to be longtime supporters of the Tempe Chamber, and we look forward to the discussion today.
Great. Thank you, Alan, and thanks again to SRP for your sponsorship and continuous support. Okay, so let's dive right into today's timely topic. During the COVID-19 pandemic, many businesses were forced to take quick measures to protect their customers, their clients, their employees. And in the aftermath of the COVID-19 pandemic, Many businesses have been subjected to lawsuits from those claiming injuries from the business owner's failure to take additional steps to protect the public or to enact specific measures. And as I mentioned earlier, to combat this new emerging threat of lawsuits, the legislature and Governor Ducey signed into law new protections that bar certain lawsuits against those businesses that enact reasonable measures to protect the public, their clients, and of course, their employees. So in this first part of our discussion, David Williams, a partner with the law firm of Davis Miles McGuire Gardner, will provide an overview of these new protections and how they protect businesses from COVID-related lawsuits, what steps businesses can take to ensure that they are protected in the future. So David, I will let you take it from here.
Thank you, Anne. I really appreciate the opportunity to educate our members on the timeliness of this topic. We can all agree that the last year has been earth-shattering for a lot of our businesses, especially for my clients in the commercial litigation industry. And the business community was at the forefront of not only having to bear the brunt of a lot of the measures that were taken to first shut down our businesses, and then frankly, subsequently to ramp back up our businesses and to be able to operate our businesses in a way that was safe to our customers, safe to the general public, and then for those employers, safe to your employees as you're bringing your employees back into the work environment. And what we saw as a result of that is as employers started and businesses started to ramp back up operations, is that you saw a cottage industry of lawsuits that have been brought against the business community for failing to take additional actions or not taking certain actions that have compounded the already economic challenges that businesses are under. When you think about lawsuits in general, most small businesses are not set up to bear and bear under the threat of continuing litigation. Litigation in general has a direct impact on business productivity through losses in litigation expenses from having to pay out a judgment, and more importantly, typically attorney's fees. You have to pay a lawyer typically to represent a business. And then there's also loss of productivity from key employees that get caught up in having to be involved in helping the law firm or your lawyer direct the litigation and maybe be a witness in the litigation. For those companies that are fortunate to have some sort of business loss insurance protection, there are also increased costs to the business through rising insurance premiums from new COVID-related claims. And so pandemic-related liability coverage has been a hot button issue throughout the states. About 25 states have enacted some sort of pandemic shield protection to protect businesses against the types of lawsuits that we were just describing. At the federal level, our political parties have been engaged in sort of a bantering back and forth of trying to enact some sort of pandemic shield protection liability. My recollection is that the Republican Party was trying to impose that as part of one of the provisions in some of the previous COVID-19 relief bills, which was never enacted. So we don't have federal liability protection at the federal level, but we do have it now at the state level. So on April 5th of 2021, the Senate and the House passed and Governor Ducey signed into law Senate Bill 1377. The general point of this, as Ann indicated in her remarks, it's legislation designed to limit liability to a wide range of businesses and third-party providers for pandemic-related claims. It's not an absolute liability. It's what we actually call qualified immunity. Qualified immunity is typically a term that's discussed as a way of providing a basic shield against a third party from third-party liability claims. Typically, you hear the term qualified immunity in the area of law enforcement reform, where police officers are given qualified immunity from third-party liability claims for alleged acts that they commit in the course of law enforcement. That's where you typically hear the word qualified immunity in our current lexicon. But qualified immunity really just means it provides a basic level of protection against a business for what we consider negligence, which is the failure to enact reasonable steps, the failure to act reasonably in a situation. What it doesn't cover, and what I'll get into in more detail in a minute, are what we call willful misconduct or gross negligence, failing to take engaging in reckless behavior, which would then create liability, which is what SB 1377 does not protect. In the law, in the statutes, SB 1377 will be codified in Arizona Revised Statute 12-515 and 12-516. And there are actually two separate laws. The one that is more germane to our discussion today is 12-515, which is the pandemic qualified immunity provision related to the business community. 12-516 deals with qualified immunity for healthcare providers and healthcare institutions. And I'll leave a few minutes of remarks for that in a minute, but the majority of my comments are going to be really directed at 12-515. So here's what it provides. 1377 states that if the governor declares a state of emergency for a public health pandemic, and public health pandemic is not necessarily defined as a COVID-19, although this legislation is retroactive to March 11th of 2020, which was when Governor Ducey enacted the first emergency executive order declarations in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. But it basically states that in the situation where the governor declares a state of emergency for a public health pandemic, a person or provider who acts in good faith, and that's a buzzword that's actually in the statute, good faith, to protect individuals from the pandemic is not liable for damages in a civil action. What that basically means is where an employer maybe imposes a mask mandate, and someone says, well, not in addition to masks, you should have just done, you should require us to have N95 masks, or you should require face shields, or you should require customers to have gloves on, or things like that, where the claim is that the business owner failed to take additional efforts, and then the customer contracted COVID or contracted some other type of illness as a result of the business owner's failure to enact certain measures. That business owner is now shielded from liability when they act in good faith and enact reasonable measures to protect the general public. As I indicated a minute ago, the SB 1377 is retroactive to March 11th of 2020. So it was specifically designed and put into place to protect business owners from COVID-related claims that would arise in compliance with Governor Ducey's earlier March executive orders. Now, the next question is, who does 1377, SB 1377 apply to? And the statute states generally that a provider that acts in good faith to enact reasonable measures. The term provider is defined in the statute, and it really is a laundry list of anybody and everybody who could be protected. It applies to a person who furnishes consumer or business goods. So it applies to, say, the sole proprietor that uses a food truck, or maybe a sole proprietor that's acting, that hosts an event, maybe out of their home, who has a home-based business. It applies to an educational institution, school districts, a property owner or property manager, a person that, a property lessor. So a commercial building owner who leases out tenant space to commercial tenants and maybe has, and in the office space, their general lobby area is still maintained by the commercial landlord. Someone comes into the space, that landlord is protected. A nonprofit organization, religious institutions. And then there are a whole host of state of Arizona agencies, local and both at the local and the state level, healthcare providers and healthcare institutions. That's a very broad-based list of who it applies to. Now, as I indicated earlier, this is a qualified immunity statute, which means it doesn't shield business owners. It doesn't provide absolute protection, which that would be what we call absolute immunity. When I say qualified immunity, again, it's to protect those business owners that take reasonable steps and act in good faith. So if someone comes into your business and say contracts whatever the next superbug is, and contracts that superbug, and then wants to file a claim or bring a lawsuit against the business owner, in order to prove that claim, that claimant or plaintiff would have to prove a couple of things. They would have to show that the business failed to protect the individual from the effects of the pandemic, which means the business owner took absolutely zero steps. had no mask mandate, had, took no reasonable steps whatsoever. Or, so there's really kind of two caveats. Caveat number one is where the business owner fails to take any precautions whatsoever, all right, in response to a pandemic related executive order. The second caveat, which will apply to the majority of people, because the majority of businesses are going to take some sort of actions to protect their customers, simply because they want to comply with the law, but also, frankly, because they want to encourage good business. And the general public is going to weed out those business owners that don't want to protect their customers. So those customers that want to take reasonable steps to protect their customers, the second part is where those customers or those businesses would be affected. So the plaintiff would also be able to have to show, for those businesses that take some sort of reasonable steps, they would have to show by what we call clear and convincing evidence that the provider or business owner failed to act or acted with willful misconduct or gross negligence. What that means then is the business owner enacts, say, a mask mandate, and somebody contracts whatever the superbug is, and then they turn around and sue that business owner. In order for that claim to go forward against the business owner, they would have to show that the business owner acted with willful misconduct, which means they intentionally took steps to not protect their customers, or they acted with gross negligence, which in the legal world, gross negligence is generally defined as extreme recklessness. And they have to prove that by what we call clear and convincing evidence. Clear and convincing evidence is a higher standard burden of proof. Normally in a civil lawsuit, the basic burden of proof is beyond a preponderance of the evidence, which is 50%. If you're in a murder trial, or if you've been charged with a crime, that's reasonable doubt, which is a super high burden of proof. Clear and convincing evidence is basically the halfway point between, I would say it's like 75%. And so what that framework then does is it provides a balancing act to provide a framework to protect those businesses where they've enacted reasonable measures, while also allowing the general public to essentially hold those businesses accountable that take no measures or act in gross negligence or act willfully in misconduct, to allow those types of claims to go forward. Generally, SB 1377 also does not cover workers' compensation claims. So if you're an employee and you contract a superbug and you have a claim against your employer, generally you don't sue your employer in the state of Arizona. We have a no-fault mandatory workers' compensation system. So the employee would still be able to make a claim through their workers' compensation carrier. And the reason for that is Arizona's workers' compensation laws are considered a no-fault system, which means you don't have to prove that the employer was at fault. All you have to do is show that the employee was injured in the workplace, and then Arizona has a designed administrative program to cover workers' compensation claims. And so workers' compensation claims are outside of that environment. The great thing about 1377 is that it does provide small businesses with certainty that if they act in good faith, they'll be protected from these types of frivolous lawsuits. What is interesting is when it says they act in good faith, it basically is that a business owner, and the statute goes on to further define that a business owner or provider is presumed to have acted in good faith if they've adopted reasonable policies or practices, and they relied on generally pandemic published related guidelines issued, say, by the federal government or the state government. What's interesting is the statute does not define what reasonable means. That's typically a term of art, but what a business owner would be able to show is if they say, I relied upon a bulletin produced by the CDC or the Arizona Department of Health Services, and I implemented these guidelines and I followed these guidelines, that is generally considered reasonable means that a business owner can follow in good faith. And so it doesn't require business owners to go to extreme measures. It just simply requires that they follow reasonable measures. And most of those reasonable measures would be dictated by our public health officials. The other caveat is 12-516, and that applies to health professionals and healthcare institutions. And what that basically says is that where a health provider has to, say, delay certain types of health services in response to a pandemic-related executive order or declaration. So, for instance, when a number of dental offices were forced to shut down some of their services during the pandemic, or elective surgeries had to be put off, someone cannot make a claim against a healthcare provider for failure to provide certain medical services in response to a pandemic-related order, and the state has implemented 12-516 to protect them. As far as things that a business owner could do, and I'll wrap up with these final thoughts. Business owners need to be abreast or stay on top of what current public health officials are saying in response to a pandemic related order. So you need to stay on top of that. You need to work with your HR professionals and your risk mitigation people to take steps to do that. The other thing that you should do is within your business, try to maintain a document retention program where you save and archive emails that show or internal related documents that show that how your business responded in good faith to a pandemic related cause. So for instance, if your business is deciding you're going to relax a mask mandate requirement because more people are getting vaccinated, you should maintain some sort of record showing that you were starting to make those decisions, what deliberation process you went through, maybe internal emails among your executive team. Probably where we see some of the future issues arising is probably going to be in the world of, relaxation of mask mandates. Will you require vaccine passports to come into your business? How are you going to require that? Those are probably going to be all the hot button issues that we anticipate going forward. And but the nice thing about 1377, and this is sort of the final point, is it provides that certainty to the business community, and 1377 was overwhelmingly supported by the business community and business lobbyist groups. And I think it certainly provides businesses with that much needed relief to get back into what we consider hopefully the new normal of being able to operate our businesses in a safe way while also not having to look over our shoulder worried about what the next lawsuit's going to be. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, David, for kind of getting us grounded in the law and what business owners need to do to help stave off those frivolous lawsuits. And would look forward to having some Q&A at the end of the discussion here. We'll head on to our next speakers, and they're going to help provide and follow up on what David was talking about, provide information and tips on safety mitigation measures that we can all use in our businesses and organizations to help avoid any potential litigation, and help keep our employees and clients safe. So joining us today from Working Aware is Dr. Scott Ostick and Eddie Fredericks. Working Aware provides customized post-pandemic workplace infection control, planning solutions, and safer workplace certifications. They help companies meet and exceed all the relevant guidance in a way that works right with each unique business operation, utilizing the knowledge of Dr. Ostick, an infectious disease physician with over 20 years of experience in the management and development of infection control planning. And just a reminder before I turn things over to the team at Working Aware, be sure to put your questions in the Q&A. There's a lot of information that we just received, and there are, I'm sure, plenty of questions out there on how you can protect your business, your employees, and your clients. So send those questions away. All right, Dr. Ostick and Eddie, gentlemen, I will let you take it away.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I'm waiting for our screen share to jump in here. But first of all, thanks, David. That was a really great summation, and I'm looking forward to hearing more questions and learning more from you. And thank you, SRP, for sponsoring the event. And thanks, Ann and the Chamber, for having us here today. The timing is great for this discussion, and we hope we can help our fellow Tempe businesses as we're navigating these new changes. So has the presentation started sharing yet?
No, we're still seeing black.
Okay, I know when we did this before, it took a minute. So I'll just start discussing as it comes in, and it should share soon. My name is Eddie Fredericks, Managing Director at Working Aware. I'll be co-presenting with my partner, Working Aware's Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Scott Ostick. This all started with the two of us working in different fields. My background has been primarily in the health and wellness industry. And I can tell you at the beginning of 2020, it was very convenient to have a friend who was an infectious disease doctor. Not many people could say that at the very beginning of 2020. I myself felt there was a lot of conflicting and confusing information out there. And I'd turn to Scott in my advisory work for a better understanding of the science and how it could help them with their business challenges. What I was also noticing was there was a lot, and I think David had mentioned this, cottage industries and businesses that were out there offering solutions and different costs that we didn't always feel was necessary for businesses. So this led us to start Working Aware so we could extend Scott's expertise and background in infection control to the business community. And we started helping people make their plans, reviewing, combining, collating, synthesizing the info from all the various sources that were out there and translating that into a practical, common sense, science-based advice that could help businesses navigate their return to work in a safe fashion. And as we work with more and more companies and listen to their concerns, we expanded into helping promote companies who are following the science and guidance with a safer workspace certification, as well as helping them to train their staff. So I still see, it looks like the screen sharing is not happening. And so hopefully people can follow because some of the slides we had to help here were there. So I'll just continue on. If we start from where we came from in this discussion, last spring, there was a number of bodies giving recommendations, often vague, sometimes contradictory, but there was a strong thread within all of them that you need a plan. OSHA's guidance on preparing workplaces for COVID-19 said, basically, if one does not exist, develop an infectious disease preparedness and response plan that can help guide protective actions against COVID-19. You also had CDC's interim guidance for business. All employers should implement and update a necessary plan. And they were very specific to your workplace, looks at the different areas and job tasks and potential exposures to COVID-19 and included control measures. Furthermore, back in Order 2020-40 from the Office of the Governor, which is now a revoked executive order, but it contained very good guidance for many of these situations still. And what we'll do ultimately, I see it's still not coming up here, Ann. I don't know what's happening on the webinar, but we'll provide these slides to you so you can send them to people because there's a lot of extra information on these as well. So let's go back in the Wayback Machine. If we look at back at early 2020, as much as there were very few people that could predict it last year, there was a number of professionals sounding alarm the growing cost of illness in the workplace. There's a lot of data. I mean, prior to the pandemic, it was estimated that the annual economic burden of influenza in the United States, depending on the severity of the influenza season, ranged from 15 to 64 billion, of which lost productivity accounted for a substantial proportion. Now, this is actually just influenza alone. Viral respiratory infections accounted for another 40 billion, according to some of the studies that we posted here. If you look back through 2003, 2017 and 2018 was actually the worst influenza at that time. Looking back, if we were prior to 2020, the worst influenza, third worst since the H1N1 in 2009. And so there was a lot of people talking about this before. What's interesting is we've been seeing this past year lower rates of influenza, and customers of ours have been looking back at prior years and seeing that they've seen significant reductions in employee illness this last year with plans being put in place. It's still a smaller data set, but as we talk more and more with businesses, they're happy with having implemented changes to their business and their operations. This slide here discussed a little bit, and I guess you guys still can't see these, huh? Let me just try to stop the share. Suki's telling me.
Hey, Eddie, yeah, maybe if you could try stopping the share and then maybe try sharing again.
Yep, let me try one more time here. Thanks. The new challenges of, there we go.
There we go. Thank you.
Cool. So let me go back to the slide that I was just talking about, because this actually shows the CDC, how they look at severity for flu. And so this issue here, if we go back, shows since 2003, the different ones. And this was data prior to the pandemic. All right, so jump back here. And so this slide here, another interesting facet is employees, and this is where we get into what David was making a point on. Let's see here. Sorry. My apologies. There we go. All right. Great. So David was making a point that a lot of this is being driven ultimately by the market, and employees are driving the conversations about the future of work. There was an interesting article and survey that came out a couple weeks ago from the Harvard Business Review. And now these are generalized, as every workplace is unique, as is the team and culture. But we're definitely seeing that employees are expecting their workplace to put considerable thought into workplace safety. Scott's going to touch upon communication plans later, but from our experience, the quality and clarity of the communications is important, if not more than the strictness of policies. Regardless of what a company might be compelled to do by law or regulatory guidance, employees are still going to want to know what steps are being taken. So people are hearing recommendations that they should have a plan. We're back to today. What do we do now? So from our conversations with businesses, it's become even more important now that many of the mask mandates have been dropped and the vaccination numbers are increasing. People are feeling better, but they want more clarity. And so we hope this information gives you some guidance on how best to move forward. Great. So I'm going to turn the rest of the presentation to my partner, Dr. Scott Ostick. Like me, Scott is a longtime resident, Tempe resident, but unlike me, he's actually a board-certified pediatric infectious disease physician. If your children have been in a Valley hospital for treatment, it's possible he's been called in to consult. He was seeing the lack of clarity out there and saw that his extensive experience in managing infection prevention programs in a hospital setting could really help out our local businesses and help them keep their employees safer at work. Scott?
Thanks, Eddie, and thanks, David, for that overview of SB 1377 and how that is going to be affecting all of us. I'm going to take a bit of our time here now and talk about infection control plans for the business workplace. But since this is an area of work that didn't even exist a year and a half ago, and since this isn't a hospital, we're going to need to start with some basics. So let's start with just what is a workplace infection control plan. Seems pretty simple and straightforward. But everybody seems to have a bit of a different answer. And when you get different answers from different sources, you get confusion. So some of that confusion has arisen when people misunderstand the distinctions between guidelines and plans and mandates. And they often get used interchangeably, but they are distinctly different things. And it's key to understand the differences between them.
Yeah, sorry, we have to redo the share. Sorry, we're having some technical difficulties here with, for whatever reason.
No worries. If you want to try again, if not, we can keep moving forward
Yeah.
with the program.
Apologies to everybody. This worked like gold when we started right before.
Okay, we're back on the screen.
So again, the differences between guidelines and mandates and executive orders. Ideally, guidelines are issued by the scientists and other experts in the field, and they reflect the underlying science of the problem at hand. And those are different from mandates or executive orders, which have to take into account all kinds of other issues. Guidelines on their own are not a plan, but many people act like they are. They get as far as saying, well, we're following CDC guidelines, and they don't go further and develop a comprehensive plan for their business. So what are the key characteristics to a workable plan? First off, it's specific to your workplace. Secondly, it identifies all the areas and jobs and tasks. These are COVID plans we're talking about primarily, so they've got to address that, but they should also address any other infections that may be in play. And thirdly, they have action plans, specific control measures that address those vulnerabilities that you identify. So going back through each of these in more detail, it's a specific plan. Now, I don't need to tell everyone their businesses are unique, but that's really a key element that we saw that was causing frustration for some people. General guidelines can be hard to apply to specific environments, especially when the people who are having to do that are working on unfamiliar subject matter. Yeah, it's a specific plan and it's built on a comprehensive assessment. And that really comes best when you're looking at your business from a totally different viewpoint than what you typically take. It needs to be informed by understanding the relevant infections of concern and understanding the modes of transmission of those germs. It's really about looking at your workplace as if you were that germ, looking for opportunities to spread from one person to the next, figuring out how you can make the next person sick. And it needs to be comprehensive because it doesn't really help if you only address 80% of the issues you identify. That remaining 20% can be all that's really needed for an infection to settle in and spread through your business. So that specific comprehensive plan then needs actions to address the issues you identify. It needs some solutions. And if you have an understanding of the science of the transmission of the germs, it's so much easier to come up with a range of practical solutions that help you to prevent spread of those germs in your workplace. Now, broadly speaking, these actions can be broken down to fit into one of three basic buckets. And for each of the issues you encounter, you can think about which of these three buckets to look in for the best solution to your problem. Now, the first is people and practices. These are the things that people are doing within your workplace. These are workflow practices, personal behaviors, hand hygiene, cough hygiene, customer interactions, things about to deal with education and training. These are things that you would write a new policy for or train people to do things differently. These are solutions that address the way people are interacting with people in your workplace. Now, the second category is cleaning. And you could say that this is also just people and practices, but it's important enough and different enough to call it out on its own. This is all about how you prepare the environment and equipment in your workplace so that people can function safely within it. Third bucket then is what we call environmental adjustments. And these are the modifications that you might need to make within your physical space of your business. Do you need to install permanent hand sanitizer dispensers or kiosks for masks? Are there places where some plexiglass shields to protect your employees might make sense? Are there any other physical alterations that you need to put in place to regulate traffic control of your employees and customers and reduce crowding? Are there alternative or additional pieces of equipment that would help make a situation better? Broadly speaking, these are the three main bucket categories that most everything should fit into. So totally simple, right? None of that's too overly complicated. And it can be fairly straightforward for a business owner to come up with a plan that would check all of these boxes in terms of having a COVID-19 plan in place, which is our goal. But as with a lot of things that appear simple, there can actually be a lot of complexity under that appearance. And I know you didn't decide to spend an hour of your day here just to get some vanilla oversimplifications of this. Now, at Working Aware, we have a very thorough process that we carry out when we're carrying out a workplace audit and crafting a plan for people. But our business isn't the focus of this webinar, and we do have some constraints in time, but we do want to try to boil down some of that into some practical points that you should be considering when you're developing a plan for your business. So when you start off your assessment, you're going to want to make sure that you tour and inspect your entire business from front door to loading dock, front of the house, back of the house, outside of the house. You need to physically walk these places and look at it rather than thinking about them in the abstract. You're going to want to consider the interactions and activities of all the people, your employees and customers, but also down to the service people and delivery people who are just there once in a while, but on a regular and ongoing basis. You ought to be looking at all the interactions between employees and customers on-site and off-site. And it's also prudent to go ahead and look at your plans for your employees who might be traveling about on sales trips or out of the office for other reasons. Think of this kind of like a home inspection when you purchase your house. You ought to be looking at every surface and every space. Some of your important policies may already exist, but they should probably be reviewed and see if they need any revisions in light of this topic. Some practices, such as sick leave, might benefit from being formalized into a policy if that's not actually in place. And there are specific actions that should be carried out in case there's an employee who's ill with COVID-19 at your work site. And these are available at the CDC website, and we can get some links out to you, but these should be formalized into a company policy for you as well. Your cleaning policies and practices that are currently in place ought to be reviewed for accuracy and thoroughness. Make sure it matches up with what you're actually doing. We would recommend that you look at the products that are being used and reference those against a list of the approved cleaners on the EPA website to make sure that they're appropriate for the task. And the impact of ventilation systems within your business places should also be reviewed and consideration given to whether or not additional filtration systems might be of benefit. These are assessments that are ideally being made with an eye towards all infectious processes, influenza as well, not just COVID, because, you know, as Eddie talked about, influenza is huge before this ever started. So after the inspection and assessment, the next step in our process is actually building the plan. And it really ought to be one that's organized and documented and available for reference by employees and by management, because nothing's really a plan unless it's organized and accessible to everybody. Now, many of these pieces we find may already be in place in your business, but they might be in scattered fashion, or they might be policies that haven't been updated in the last couple of years, and some of it needs to be reworked. So, you know, as you create that assessment plan, you're probably going to find that there's a number of recurring issues throughout your whole business, and that with just a few simple steps, you can put those in place and really have a big part in transforming your business into a safer workspace. And one of the key points that Eddie mentioned, and we can't hammer home hard enough, is that we've worked with the businesses. This is a ton of new information for employees, for owners, for customers, and the companies that we've worked with have really needed to spend a huge amount of time on communication of their plans and the new policies to their employees. And beyond just the employees, it's really critically important to have communication with your customers as well, so that they know what to expect from you in terms of your approach to infection prevention. You know, no plan has any value at all if it's only sitting on someone's hard drive, or if it's lost as an attachment in somebody's email somewhere. Training happens for all of the key business processes that you have, and this should really be no different from any of the other business processes that you have. It's got to be trained. One final organizational piece that really needs to be put in place as well for it to have maximal efficacy is that it needs to be the responsibility of an actual designated individual. If it's everybody's responsibility, then it's actually nobody's responsibility. Somebody needs to be in charge of maintaining it and updating it. And this isn't necessarily as daunting as it may seem if you focus on building your plans based on the science rather than the mandate, because mandates can change, but scientific principles are much more stable. If you focus your attack on this, on understanding the guidelines and some of the science behind it, and you build your plan on those, you won't have to run around and overhaul your plan every time there's a change in an executive order. Something substantial comes along, we touch base with those companies we've worked with and help them make adjustments as needed. the risk you have if you don't have some individual responsible for making those adjustments is that you may end up with a plan that's either outdated and has you doing more or less than what is currently needed. So I always say you got to tell people what you're going to tell them, tell it to them, and then tell them what you just told them. So I guess that's the part we've come to now. This really doesn't have to be overly complicated, but it may understandably be outside the wheelhouse of expertise for a lot of people. And while the COVID-19 numbers have been declining as vaccine uptake has been increasing and other measures are put in place, I really don't think this is a problem that's likely to totally disappear, no matter how much we might hope otherwise. Workplace infection prevention, it's an issue that's long been neglected, really to our collective detriment, as Eddie pointed out earlier. Workplace infections have just been accepted as a necessary cost of doing business, but we don't think it has to be that way. And we'd love to work with any businesses who want to move away from that prior status quo. Thanks for your time. Eddie, any other comments you want to hop in and make?
Yeah, just to close, thanks. There's a lot of information we'd be happy to share with you if you want to learn more. It's very important to us as we work with the Tempe community to offer information that anybody can use, whether or not they're working with us or not. So please reach out. But if you want further help, you can happily reach out to us, and we'd be happy to answer any questions in the Q&A session. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Ostick and Eddie. And we have some questions that I want to throw out to the group. And David, actually, I'll start with you. You mentioned that SB 1377 is retroactive to March of 2020. So what if a business has already had a frivolous lawsuit filed against them? What steps should they take?
So it's interesting because the law is retroactive, it would actually now be an additional, what we call affirmative defense to the business owner. So in a normal situation, a business is sued simply on like a negligence theory. Okay, so plaintiff is injured because they contracted COVID. They say supermarket didn't put up dividers or require masks, and therefore I got COVID. Now they're suing the business owner for negligence. Now the elements of that claim have changed because now they can't sue the business owner for negligence. In order for the plaintiff to move forward, they'd have to show that the business owner acted with gross negligence or willful misconduct by clear and convincing evidence. And the business owner would simply have to show that they enacted reasonable measures along the lines of what the guys at Working Aware have kind of outlined, and the claim really goes nowhere. It would probably be dismissed. And if I'm a plaintiff's attorney and I'm faced with that, I'm probably gonna be rethinking my lawsuit.
Okay, so following up on that, are there circumstances then where a business can be sued for failing to enact measures to protect their customers or the public?
Yeah, so there's really the two situations that I outlined earlier, which is where the business owner takes no measures to protect the public. That's the one where that's going to show that they've enacted no reasonable efforts. And keep in mind, the COVID liability qualified immunity protection is designed to protect those business owners that in good faith take some sort of reasonable measures. So if a business takes no measures, then they're not going to have the protection of the law. And then the other circumstance is really what the qualified immunity statute is designed for, is to hold those businesses accountable that either grossly negligent, engage in willful misconduct, or enact no measures, which is really willful misconduct. So it's the same thing. They either enact no measures, which means they're showing that they're not reasonable. They're engaging in gross negligence. And so really under either situation, the business would be held accountable.
Great, thank you for that. Dr. Ostick and Eddie, what are some of the challenges that you're seeing with companies that are trying to create these plans as they reopen? There's a lot of constant changing information, and the theme today is clarity and certainty for businesses, but yet it seems like it's a constantly changing environment. The science changes. First you had to wipe everything down, and then we realized aerosols were the main source for spreading COVID. So what are the challenges you see that businesses are facing in trying to put some type of clarity together for their employees and their customers?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. One of the ironies is the people that are reaching out to us have actually done quite a bit of work already. It's not like people call us because they've done nothing. I mean, people are doing quite a bit of work. I think when what you kind of focused on there, the issue has been there's the guidelines, but how do they apply to their business? And so they generally need some help and some eyes of helping to put it into some formalized policies. I really like what SB 1377 is doing, because I think there was some concern that people were trying their best, but they were going to be liable. So I think right now, businesses getting the freedom to be able to look at their business and do what's best for their unique business is going to help. The biggest issue we've seen with people implementing is a lack of training and communication. And I think this is where, when we talk about an overall look at the future of work, this is one of the, how do you train employees that aren't in the office? How do you educate employees that are not coming in all the time? And so we've seen people have challenges. It's partly why we started working into an LMS training system for some folks, but having people be able to communicate that to their teams in a remote environment has been a challenge.
Yeah, and so following up on that, are there any, and open this up to the group, of course, are there any government requirements or mandates that make it so we must have a plan in place? Or is it you better have a plan in place if you don't want to have to face a lawsuit? So I'll open it up to the group, both of you, for all three of you, I should say.
Yeah, there's not currently a piece of paper that you're going to pull out that says you have to have this in place, but that doesn't mean it's not the right thing to do for your employees, your customers, your business, the existence of your business. I mean, if these infections aren't controlled within your workplace, you may not have a workplace to go back into. But no, it's not currently at a regulation level. It's a best practices
in a guidance level. So the two slides that didn't get seen, some of the slides that didn't get seen through my technical difficulties there, CDC and OSHA directly have guidance saying that you should have a plan. Again, though, this is guidance. And I'll let David speak to this. A lot of this, though, is more about there's what you're forced to do, and then there's what you maybe should do that's just smart business. And so I would rather, and I think David would agree, we'd rather see this be a letting businesses do what's smart and right for their business, as opposed to an overly draconian mandate that just maybe applies to all businesses regardless of what their particular circumstances is. I think it's better for them to be able to look at it individually.
Yeah, I could agree more. I mean, the market is going to be self-regulating. The market, the customers, your clients and your customers are going to regulate you out of, or are going to basically self-regulate you out of the market. If you're not going to provide something to protect them, you're not going to earn their business. And keep in mind, the biggest thing about SB 1377, it's designed to protect the business owner from claims from the public, their customers that come into the workplace, that come into their business and do business with them in the marketplace. SB 1377 is not designed to protect you from claims, the employer from claims against their employees. However, because that's the workers' compensation issue that I talked about earlier. However, you want to make sure your employees are trained in your policies, because those are they're serving those customers. And so you want to make sure that your employees understand these protections and that you provide these levels of protections for your employees so that they can come back safely into the work environment, do their job to serve your customers. So it really, it's a system that kind of builds upon itself. While you're protecting against third-party claims, you also want to make sure your employees are following the guidelines and understand guidelines so that they feel safe coming back into the work environment to provide the manual labor to get your business running.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of talking about that, you mentioned the workers' comp during your conversation. So how can an employee show that they actually contracted COVID in the workplace? You have an accident, it's easy to document that, but how is that? How can they claim that?
That's almost going to be more of an infectious disease process-oriented question, because in a workers' compensation environment, the worker still has to show that their injury arose out of the workplace environment in order to be covered under workers' compensation. And that's why generally we don't sue, our employers aren't sued by their employees, because we have our workers' compensation program set in place. What's interesting is, in the workers' compensation environment, an employer can be sued by an employee for gross negligence, which is the very type of qualified immunity out that the general business owner has. They can still be sued for gross negligence. So to answer your question directly, it's a hard claim to prove. There's probably not going to be any perfect way of doing it. You'll probably most likely see these workers' compensation claims arising in maybe reaction to if a employer mandates a vaccine requirement and you get somebody who has an adverse reaction to the vaccine and they make a workers' compensation claim in that environment. It's going to be really hard to prove that you contracted COVID exclusively through the environment because it's so permeated in our general public.
All right, thank you for that. And we have a few minutes left. Are there any closing statements, David, that you'd like to make to the group? And then I'll turn it over to Dr. Ostick.
I think really the point about this is just taking reasonable steps. And most businesses, like we've already talked about, have already done that because they want to earn the business of their customers and they want to be good contributors to society in the marketplace. And as long as you're implementing reasonable protections, then you're going to earn the business and you're going to be safe under this law. So you don't have to do draconian efforts. You just have to do good faith efforts. You have to try your best, and basically following the guidelines that are passed down by our federal and state public health officials and staying on top of that, you're already to the finish line.
Great, thank you. And Dr. Ostick, Eddie, any closing remarks, gentlemen?
No, I think it's great what David said. I think we're in a new, it gives businesses right now a freedom to really look at this and implement policies. And again, to David's point, the market will dictate that. And businesses, and especially the ones we've worked with, they've seen it makes more sense to have certain policies because people are happier working there, they're feeling better, and they're staying healthy. And so I think that's good that we can focus on that as opposed to worrying about being sued.
Great. All right. Well, thank you all again. Thank you, Eddie, Dr. Ostick. Thank you, David, for being here today, sharing your knowledge and expertise. It's an important issue that we were advocating for to make sure our businesses were protected from those liability issues here in Arizona. And hopefully we'll look forward to working with you all on future initiatives and programming. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And just to start wrapping things up, a reminder to our viewers, on June 25th, the Tempe Chamber will host its State of the Chamber and Annual Awards presented by Southwest Airlines. So if you haven't already, reserve your seat to help us thank our volunteers and those making an impact in the community, as well as we'll announce our small and large businesses of the year. So we have some amazing businesses here in Tempe, so please join us to help celebrate success in our community. And again, thank you to SRP for your sponsorship of the Emerging Issues Forums and to everyone joining us today. We look forward to another year of serving the business community, ensuring that we can continue to build an economic environment that enhances the economic vitality of you, our members, as we continue to move out of this pandemic. So thank you all and have a great day. Take care.